Working Cows Podcast, episode 307. This episode is brought to you by Performance Livestock Analytics.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Mineral Studios, and this episode is brought to you by Performance Livestock Analytics. Every year, you pick your replacement heifers. Some become profitable cows, and others disappoint. How can you make more reliable selections? Genetic testing. Commercial cow-calf producers like you are using Inherit Select from Zoetis. Request a call at inheritprogress.com and ask about free TSUs to get you started. Very excited to be joined today by a longtime friend of the Working Cows podcast, Jacob Miller. You may know Jacob from Livewire Fence Supply. He does lots of great work there, supplying all kinds of tools and materials for regenerative grazing. So if you're interested in that, you can check out a link in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/307. There will also be a link there to a post that Jacob recently made on Facebook about the impacts of long-term good grazing management on the drought that they have been recently experiencing, and which has showed signs of breaking recently in Southwest Nebraska. So as I said last week, we're going to keep it in Southwest Nebraska this week. Talked to the Pribinos last week. We're going to talk to Jacob Miller this week, and we're going to talk to him about some of the ways that they have managed through this drought that they've been going through, and that, as I said, has been showing some signs of weakening. So without saying too much more about that, I will just welcome Jacob to the show. Jacob, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Clay.
I'll embed the post in the show notes page for today, which will be workingcows.net/307. Workingcows.net/307 will be the show notes page for today, and I'll embed a link to a post that you put up that I also shared on the Working Cows Facebook page about kind of the moisture pattern that you've been in over the last few years, and then what has happened in the last couple of weeks or last 3 weeks or so as of this recording, and kind of what have been the results of that. So I guess you've been boots on the ground there, and you will be able to describe it better than I can. So talk to me about kind of the last few years as far as what moisture has been like for you guys, and then we'll work up to kind of where we're at today and some of the decisions that you've made in the intervening years.
Yeah, so over the last few years, Clay, it really kind of goes back to the spring of 2020. We started off spring of 2020. I actually had a college kid working for me. We were tearing out corrals, and then as soon as we got them tore out, COVID hit there in April. First part of April, my help left, and all of a sudden I had no corrals to get cows loaded out to go to grass. So in that time frame, we couldn't hardly run the skid loader in the corral because it was so muddy that we couldn't hold it in place to do anything, which at that time I did not know where we were headed. Had pretty good moisture there through the spring, and then I always remember it because it was the day before Dad's birthday. It was July 12th, 2020. We had a hailstorm like I have never seen. I had a pretty diverse cool season mix planted under a pivot, had oats and then 7 or 8 different clovers and some different plants in there. And I had actually went back in. I got some Jimmy Red corn from Michael Thompson, and I set a corn planter up to go every other row, Jimmy Red corn and grain sorghum or Milo. And we were going to fatten calves on that winter. July 12th, we had like baseball size hail, and I'm talking 3 to 4 inches of it stacked up on the ground. There was nothing left over ankle high in that field. So we got about 2 inches of rain with that storm, but we didn't get any rain again until fall after that. Had a little shower that fall. So pastures were beat into the ground, still up until this spring. I could find holes in the hillsides on the southwest facing slopes where those hailstones had went in. We just had not grown enough root mass since that time to even heal those spots. So we kind of defoliated everything, dried up, and then went into this. So we got through 2020, 2021 hit. That was first to second week of May 2021. We got about 1.5 inches of rain. So it did get the grasses woke up. We got grass growing, kind of got things going. But no rain then until September. Basically, we picked up about 70 hundredths. So in that meanwhile, in 21, things were getting progressively drier. We could see that we were clearly in a drought, and really started looking at options. So then we culled a little heavier, culled some older cows and some stuff like that, just some of those type of things that were easy calls to do. Then we get into 22, 21, that winter, not hardly any moisture. 22, no moisture until again about the second week in May, and we got about 1.80 inches. That was pretty much our rainfall for the year until September. Again, we picked up about another 0.75 inches. But right here in Southwest Nebraska, we're about a 21, 22 inch annual rainfall. We were under 6 inches that summer of 22, and it was our driest year on record according to National Weather Service since they've been keeping records. And then we picked up some snow here the winter, late 22, early 23. Thought we were sitting all right till spring started coming around. Then it was just cold and dry. Nothing was happening, and it was getting very hard to sleep at night, honestly. A lot of issues just with mental health on how do we keep going, what's going to happen, do we need to be looking for jobs. Those conversations were getting very real. I'm not sure there was going to be any cattle left on the place if we were going to take care of the land. And then here until the second week in May, we got 3 inches of rain, 1.25 inches the next week. And then here, Memorial Day weekend, Friday Memorial Day weekend, we had a rain that was 5.32 inches. And then it's rained a couple times since then. We're up to about 7 inches here on the weekend. So now we went from having our driest year on record to in 3 weeks' time, we've had over half of our annual rainfall fall. So that's where that post came from, and just really seeing the practices we had implemented. I kind of broke down in the pasture there the other day just because it hit me. It worked. We got to see it firsthand, and the work had paid off. And there was definitely people that are less fortunate. There was homes lost. There's not been any loss of life, thankfully, that I've heard. But it makes you look around just as an ag community, as farmers, ranchers, we can do better than we have. So that's kind of the past 3 years up to today. So.
Yeah. Very, very good. I appreciate that summary. So where were you at in kind of, and I don't know what else to call it, but the soil health journey? I mean, I know since I've been aware of you, you've been talking about these things, and I became aware of you early on in my journey in the Working Cows podcast. So you've been talking about these things since that, but was there a generation before you that was making investments in these things, or what was that journey like for you guys?
So as far as the ranch itself goes, the journey pretty much started on 9/11. Grandpa was in the hospital having open heart surgery, and while he was in recovery, he saw Air Force One land in Omaha that day out of his room there. So that was kind of emergency surgery. Wasn't time to plan for it. Dad and Grandpa had a lot of row crop acres at the time. Had a lot of sorghum sedan planted that would typically be baled up. We would bring it home, grind it, feed it during the winter. We were a very conventional operation at that point. All of a sudden that happens. Dad's by himself trying to run 500 to 600 pairs, trying to farm a few thousand acres of row crop, trying to put up all the feed, and things couldn't get done. So he put a fence around sorghum sedan. It was a full pivot, turned the cows in. They weren't happy in a week that they had stomped all the feed down. So that was really kind of where it started. Equipment was worn out at that point. So then it was a serious look at, do we replace hay equipment? Do we find something else out? So that's kind of where Dad's soil health journey started without knowing it at that point. Then from there on, then we started doing weekly rotations on that winter feed because we are fortunate here. We do have a very good mix of warm and cool season diverse grasses, and we're running on about 8,000 acres of native range. And that does include some CRP that has expired. I should add that in there. So anyways, for our operation, winter feed is our shortfall, same as many. So the desire to decrease input costs and do that, it all just kind of fell together then. But we really started pushing it harder around 2010 or so. I was just getting done with my junior college at that point. And then I ended up going to college for 3 more years. And I did an internship with Dale Strickler as I was finishing up college there. And that kind of really opened my eyes to the soil health world and the potentials that were there. Through Dale then, I was able to meet a lot of people and get exposed to a lot more than I'd ever been before. So that's kind of where that journey started. And then I came home from college, spring of 2013, bought Grandpa's cows from him, rented his land from him. And then Dad and I just kind of split everything half and half. And so each of us pay half the inputs, get half the proceeds, and make the decisions together on the place. Then if we look at the 10-year pattern, though, we were just really getting into the drought in 13 when I came home. They're kind of finishing it up. So at that time, we had to cull back then, sold some cows and some things. So then spring of 14 is actually shaping up to be pretty much just like this year. I was excited to go plant a multi-species cover crop. We planted our first cover crop. It was an oat pea cover crop, just a pretty basic mix. Put it in the ground, and we couldn't hardly get it to germinate. Some of it came up, then all of a sudden the floodgates opened, and we had knee-high oats before we knew it. So then from there on, we started getting into more diverse grazing mixes, grazing at different times of the year. Some things like that. But the other thing that we did at that time that has probably helped our operation more than anything, one of our pastures is about 1,200 acres here just south of Culbertson. And that pasture had been severely overgrazed in small areas because of lack of water. The pasture is over 1.5 miles long, and there was 2 watering points, one at the north end and one at the south end, and nothing in between to speak of. So about 25% of that whole place was utilized, and it was 100% utilized in those areas. We were down to bare ground, and then we had grass stands that were basically dying out in between there because of no grazing. So we had put cross fences in that place after Dad and Grandpa bought it, early 2000s. But then after destocking, our herds had got smaller, so we went back in again, and we cut most of the paddocks in half or in thirds. And we ended up with 32 permanent paddocks on that place then. And that's where that picture was taken that we talked about earlier. So at that point, just getting more aggressive, figuring out how to put more moves into our native range or increase herd size to get that stock density up was really what has changed it. And I would say stock density has done more for us than anything on our place, just because we're now getting that. We're getting the soil cycle going, the water cycle working, just really the trampling effect. Trying to get every plant to be bit, stepped on, spit on, anything. I would say overall that has been the biggest thing for us. Since it got dry here again, and with where cover crop seed prices were, the last 3-4 years, we had some weed issues as well. Which the weeds really don't bother me because we can graze those as well as anything, except it's hard to graze a pigweed in January. So we'd kind of stepped back and got a little bit more aggressive with some chemical in some areas. So that kind of put us back to some single species mix, or just not a mix, just back to a monoculture in places. So then that's where that put us. Still like to graze multi-species mixes as often as possible, obviously. But that's kind of been a very quick overview of our soil health journey. So
You mentioned stock density is important. What kind of stock densities do you think is kind of where the tipping point is, or is it, the higher the better, or what do you think about that?
It's kind of a loaded question too, I guess. Depends on the rest period following, I guess, is my answer.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the higher the better always works as long as there's adequate rest following. You get into a weather pattern like we were just in, and if it doesn't rain, it doesn't matter how long it's been since you just grazed it because no recovery happened. But really for us, we're at about 25,000 pounds an acre on our native range, which was plenty last year. But I would really like to be triple or quadruple that in a normal year. The thing we get to, though, is some of our ground is very steep. And as far as water and all that infrastructure goes, it's going to be a challenge to keep things watered and not be trailing or hurting part of it, is kind of the point we're at.
Sure.
And then on the farmland side of it, we had some corn go down about 10 years ago. Grandpa was still growing a little bit of corn then, and there was about 80 bushel on the ground. So on one side of the creek, we had that corn that was down. On the other side, we had forage sorghum there. And on the side with the corn, we were running about 1 million pounds an acre. And it absolutely decimated that field, but that's kind of where we had to be to get the corn cleaned up. And we were doing moves twice a day on that. That worked well too, but there again, it's management planning to get that field back in shape before the next crop comes. So I don't know for me that there's a magic number on stock density anywhere. I think it kind of depends on how it fits into the rest and recovery or the field prep or whatever you're doing. But yeah, I think stock density really just falls into where every plant can be manipulated in one way or another and allow full recovery in your situation.
Absolutely. No, I knew that was going to be a it depends question answer, but I think it is something that we miss, and even 25,000 pounds to the acre, when you start talking about that as a stock density, that's tighter than you think it is, and then when you start going higher than that, it's yeah, I've never even messed with that or seen it really, but when you start talking about the size of the paddock that you're giving and the number of cows that you're putting in there to get to even 25,000 pounds the acre, it starts to be like, oh, well, this is more than I thought it was going to be. And so I think that's just something to call people's attention to and know that those are being a important part of what you guys are doing and how you've accomplished what you've accomplished, that we shouldn't just gloss over that stock density issue.
Yeah, and I think looking back over the last 10 years, I would say that stock density has probably averaged around 5,000 to 6,000 pounds an acre. But in our area, like 400 to 500 is pretty average. Just because guys will go turn a cow out for the summer and they're running about 10 acres to a cow.
Right.
So that's kind of, I guess, to put that in context with our area and what we're doing. So the yearlings are higher and the cows are a little bit lower. So
sure. And what would be, where would you recommend somebody start if they're looking, that was the end of your post says, today it's honestly happy tears riding through this pasture. It's not to brag or a look at me post. It's a challenge to change your management and make it work on your operation too. So where would you encourage people to start if they were going to look at trying to make this a reality on their operation?
Yeah, honestly, like in our area, when I say that 300 to 400 pounds is pretty general, just double it.
Yeah.
That is a great place to start. Just do something to get better, but doubling it would be a pretty easy spot. The biggest thing that I run into, and I help some guys set up some grazing systems and stuff. But everybody says, okay, well, if I double it, then I'm just going to put one cross fence in this pasture and I can move them back and forth. Well, now we're rotational overgrazing because no recovery happened at that point. So, I mean, as everybody knows that's doing it, it's a pretty intertwined web of things happening, different side effects of doing one thing or the other. So that's the main thing, too, is making sure that there are enough paddocks and enough rest time in between if you are going to increase stock density. So.
Walk me through the destocking process that you guys have gone through over the past years, because I think that's really the issue, right? Is being willing to pull back on the intensity at which you're grazing, so that you're not damaging those plants, so that when the rain comes, there's still armor on the soil to catch that water, to slow it down, to infiltrate it, so it doesn't run off, it doesn't silt in, in the low spots and wash out the fences and all those things. So kind of talk to me about the destocking process that you guys went through.
Yeah, so the destocking process, we'll go back to the drought of 2013. When that one hit, we were strictly a cow-calf operation. We were keeping our own replacement heifers, but those were the only yearlings we were running on grass. So when that happened, we ended up selling about 35% of the herd at that time. And then during that drought, we did something that we shouldn't have done, but it was an expensive and valuable lesson. We planted a pivot to a brachytic dwarf forage sorghum, or sorghum Sudan, excuse me. We were grazing it. So we took our first heat cycle on that. Then they released CRP for grazing. So that we're going to save that for winter feed. We went straight to the CRP, and we did not breed a cow after we cut nutrition and went to that. So at that point, that made some pretty easy calls again for us. So when that happened, our calving period was awesome. The calves we had were more consistent than they've ever been. Things worked really well. So after that happened, we went to a 42-day calving window. We had been on about, a 65 to 70-day before. So just turned the bulls in for 2 heat cycles. So just that in itself culled quite a few cows for us over the next few years from there. So then we started retaining our own yearlings to graze because we knew that they were going to be something that was going to get marketed within the year. So if they needed to go early financially, it might sting a little bit, but it was not the end of the world. That's something to go easy. Then we hit the low cattle prices following there, in 15 and 16. As I was talking about, some of those cows that weren't getting bred, the cull cows, were only worth $500 to $600 then. So we said, all right, we're going to just turn a bull in with them for fall calvers and see what happens. Well, we were getting like over 92% conception rates doing that. They weren't recovering fast enough after that calf, the ones that had been lagging behind when we shortened up our breeding window. But they were getting bred for the fall herd, and they were staying bred after we got them bred that first time. So then fast forward now to the current drought that we're just hopefully coming out of here, and we had a herd of about 100 fall cows built up. So 21, we sorted off, we had about 100 at that point. So in 21, we had about 40 of them that were older cows, or some that had raised some smaller calves, anything like that. So they were the next thing to go. So we sent the first 40 head there in 21, sent calves to town early, the yearlings to town early. Normally we'd like to keep them till September, October, kind of in the July, 1st August timeframe they went. And then we got into 22, hadn't had any moisture to speak of, and we kind of got things through 1st of June. We were hoping to see rain by then, but really 1st of June around here is kind of when we need our moisture for that warm season grass to take off, and it didn't happen. So at that point we knew, all right, it's time to make some pretty serious decisions here. So it was easy for us because, it's hard to keep emotion out of these decisions. But we'd already had it set up. We knew that fall cow herd was kind of the disposable thing on the operation along with the yearlings. And we sold the fall cows first because we had looked at feed prices, and I couldn't unroll cane and alfalfa for less than $5 a day. So you do that from 1st of July to 1st of June, and there's no way the calf out of those cows is even going to pay the feed bill. So we put wheels under them, and they ended up going down to northeast Oklahoma around the Pawhusk area there. That was about 1st of August. It seemed like during this destocking process for about the last half of June and the whole month of July, all we did was sort animals day in, day out. It seemed like before it got too hot. So that was kind of a stressful time just to go through at that point. And then the yearlings went early again in the July-August timeframe in 22. And then also any cow that we had ever made a note on in the spring herd, she went. So between all of that, we had pretty much destocked about 45% of the herd or so, give or take. That's pretty close. So that was kind of the route we did. And then it seems like each drought we go through, we come up with, more plans to destock and how to do it. So going forward, we're going to stay at the same number of cows we're at now because last year was the driest year on history here. We'd like to think that we can maintain that number throughout the years. And we can talk more later, but we're kind of pushing back into some cash crops, not necessarily for grain harvest, but we're using crop insurance as a safety net on that. And we can touch on that here later. So anyways, by doing that, we're looking at buying in-balling calves in the fall so we can increase our yearling numbers on the operation and have something that can leave sooner when it needs to be done. The biggest thing that I could see from what we did to watching others, though, we tried to stay about 2 seasons ahead planning of where we were at. Like in the spring, we're looking at winter feed and trying to figure out the winter situation and everything else. Where so many people around us, they wean calves in August early and they're like, man, we're out of grass. What are we going to do? So they sold cows at that point and it was too late because they needed to lock everything up to feed already. And obviously when you're going on your 3rd year of drought and the driest year in history, there's no feed to be had. And if you do find it, you can't afford it. We had 300 acres of dryland forage sorghum last year, and we averaged 7 days an acre grazing off of it. Normally we get 100. So that's just kind of the extent of how dry it was there. But timing is maybe as important or more important than the actual number of animals you destock. Because if you do it too late, it doesn't matter how many you get rid of. You don't have any feed left for the ones you do have. So I think timing is another key to that point that is missed a lot of times.
Sure. Yep. And so did you sold the herd, the fall calving herd? You sold them or they just got moved?
No, we sold them.
Yeah.
They went on and they were kind of our cows that had, like I said, one strike from not breeding up on time. Still cows that were raising very nice calves. And the guy just sent me a text here about a month ago. He was super happy with the weaning weights and everything went, so it worked well for all of us.
Yep. That's always good to hear. And I've heard that before too, asked that question specifically actually one time to a guy that said, we sell all of our ones that miss to another guy and he makes them into fall calvers. And he said he's tickled with them. They always go there and breed up and do fine. It's almost like they're just better at being a fall cow than they are a spring cow. And they didn't work in our spring herd and we sent them over there and they work as a fall cow. So I think that there's something to that. I don't know what it is, but
there is. And for me, it's really hard for me to see how that cow can get bred in the middle of December when there's no green forage or anything. But I think the main thing is that they have all summer to recover on lush green grass.
Yep. Right.
So I think that's about the only thing I can work up that makes them breed back at that point. But
let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Performance Livestock Analytics. Performance Livestock Analytics helps you measure what matters on your cattle operation by helping you make easy work of record keeping. Feed info, health data, financial records, load them up, and it's in the cloud, ready and waiting. Need it now? Later? 2:25 in the morning? Anytime, day or night, just open the app, look at the trends, discover opportunities, and simplify your data. Numbers are kind of our thing. They can be your thing too. That's Performance Livestock Analytics, and there's strength in numbers. Request your free demo at performancelivestocanalytics.com. And I think there were some other decisions made throughout this process as far as bringing in different species. Can you talk to me a little bit about that decision and that process and what that's been like?
Yep. So we brought in some Dorper hair sheep as well. We don't have many. We're only at about 35 head right now. Trying to get through the learning curves. I see enough about multi-species grazing. The people that I know that are grazing sheep and doing a good job of it are doing incredible things. So I really think that there's enough potential there that we have to explore it. When we started looking at sheep, I don't want anything to do with shearing animals. And anything you have to shear is pretty much a seasonal breeder where you can breed the Dorper hair sheep out of season. The other thing that has played into this a bit is that there's a solar farm going in not too far from us that I think we're going to have a shot to graze. So that definitely makes sheep easier if there's an 8-foot chain link fence around the outside. So what we're doing right now is trying to put ourselves in a position that we can expand the sheep quickly if need be, and trying to figure out if we can make them work in the infrastructure we have now. I'm not going to go fence all the pastures and rebuild infrastructure to make sheep work on the operation at this point anyways. We pretty much have barbed wire perimeters and then single strand high tensile cross fences. So if we can put a second wire lower on those cross fences, that's not a big deal to me to go do that as far as holding sheep if we see the return. But I think it would definitely help our species diversity in the pasture and our utilization too, without affecting our stocking rate. So right now the focus on the sheep is, honestly, they're just cleaning up weeds around the yard. We're parking the mower and trying to reduce equipment use here and get some good out of it. We actually just got a stud you bought here at the Reno sale over Memorial Day weekend, and Nick Voss got her hauled home, and we just got her here yesterday. So right or wrong, our thought process is if we're going to run a few sheep, we're going to try and run the best ones we can at this point, kind of going along with the South African breeding standards. So that when we do have the opportunity to expand, we can have our own ram flock set up already, and we can produce those. So we don't have to go out and try and find, high dollar rams to fill that with. This term is new to me, but in the Dorpers, they're using the term wet and dry, and not as far as if they have a lamb at side or anything. A wet animal is one that can go take care of itself without supplemental feed. They're deep. They have a lot of capacity. They're long. The fat covering goes down their top line all the way down to their navel. And dry sheep don't have much fat covering. Are going to need supplemental inputs. And for us, we cannot find wet sheep around here. So 2 weekends ago, Ash Phillips was up here out of South Africa. We saw him at Hutchinson, Kansas, and went through and discussed some sheep. And I told him, I said, we're as green as you can find on sheep. But we went and looked at some sheep, and I said, I think this is what we're looking for. He just laughed. He said, well, when you know livestock, you know livestock. He said, that's what you need. So really, they are kind of mini cows with a little bit of different palate, I guess, as far as what they want to eat. We've had sheep that you can't hardly keep in, but we just weaned lambs here. That was about 1st of April. We had enough forage to turn them out on now. So I had we had a 12 joule charger on less than a quarter mile of polywire when we turned them out, just a 3-wire. And I set them up. I put their alfalfa bale we had been supplementing with right in the fence line so they could all go try and get a bite of that. We hit every one of them off the bat. And when I went to rotate them the first time, I could not get them through the fence.
Yeah.
We lifted it in the air. So that was the problem I hoped would happen. So I really feel that if we have sheep that are developed on our place with the system we want to use, I think we can make it work. and get going that way. So at this point, honestly, one of the main reasons we brought sheep on is there's something I've wanted. But we've got a 4-year-old daughter and one that'll be 1 here the end of June. And my wife and I, and it's something that the family enjoys. My daughter's got a lot more confidence around the sheep than she does around cattle and stuff. So kind of just going down that avenue too on a family activity, and hopefully something too that, my wife can make more calls on and do some of that, or the kids or whatever. So really just trying to diversify what we're doing on the operation too.
Sure. What have been some of the lessons you've learned in that regard with the sheep?
There has been a lot of lessons with sheep. One of the first lessons we learned is that a ewe nearly needs the same crude pounds of protein every day as a cow does. But when they weigh 160 pounds and eat 3% of their body weight, it takes quite a little better quality feed to get that into them. Where I had been too particular on not supplementing protein at times, we've had to supplement some protein and do some different things that way, which is not a big deal. It's just going through the learning curve of how and when to supplement that to be efficient with it. The other thing that we did too, being that the drought pushed us into the dry lot with the sheep, we were lambing in March, which was not our plan. We'd rather do it in sync with nature. But I told my wife, I said, if we're going to be feeding these sheep, we're going to get every lamb out of them we can. So we turned the ram in and we started supplement just a little bit of grain, like a pound a day, about a month before they lambed. And I learned that the lamb doubles in size in the last 2 to 3 weeks in the uterus. So we pulled several lambs. And then Ash Phillips from South Africa there, he told us, he said, if you're in a position you need to supplement, don't do it until after the lamb is born, because you created your own problems doing that. And then so by graining him, we also learned that grain grows feed on sheep. So now we need to trim hooves and do some of that. The other big hurdle that we've had too is guard animals. We did have sheep briefly for a couple of years in 2020. We learned we were not set up for them at all then, so we just got rid of them. But then we had about 20 ewes that had lambed, and we weaned 7 lambs after the coyotes got done with them that year. And the coyotes just ran down ewes and killed them as well. We had a guard dog at that point. She was a young pup and was not old enough to defend the flock. So now we just got in a couple guard dogs here 2 weeks ago, just getting them bonded with the flock. So once you start doing that, well, sheep love dog food. So then now you got to build a feeder to set it up so the dogs can eat themselves and the ewes not eat the feed. So there's been a lot of different things like that. And one thing my grandpa always told me, he never had sheep when I was around, but my aunt had some in 4-H, and Grandpa just told me that sheep were born looking for a place to die, which I think is pretty true, because it's freak things just seem to happen all the time. We'd put in some small tire tanks and a 2-day-old lamb gets bumped into it and drowns. One of them was eaten out of a hay feeder and some hay rolled down and apparently pinned her down and suffocated her. So just several little things like that. But the thing I keep going back to with most of these things that happen is if we're out grazing, a lot of this is not going to happen. Accidents in tanks and feeders and stuff like that. But as soon as we get out grazing, then we're more prone to predator issues too. So getting a strong set of guard animals, I think, is money very well spent up front. But.
Yep. Yeah, we had our sheep down to 2 wires and they weren't out, and everything was working real good, but then lost a bunch of lambs to coyotes this last winter. And so we've got guard animals with ours now too, and working on getting them back into the 2 wires and rotating with them that way, kind of behind the yearlings that we're running right now. So That's kind of the idea that we're going with, because we are grazing the yearlings for somebody who's wanting gain, and so we're gonna run the sheep behind the yearlings and let them go that way. So Yeah. What do you think kind of is some of the other keys to your success as far as, first of all, this destocking, surviving the drought, and then being ready to capture rainfall as it comes? Is it just grazing and stock density and fence and water infrastructure, or were there some other things that really, you feel like tipped the scales in your favor?
I think it's the whole ball of wax, honestly. Everything kind of works together. But I think probably the biggest thing, though, is being flexible and being willing to change to make those decisions. Because I was having some serious conversations with myself here beginning of April. I was sitting down and looking at stuff because I knew that if we didn't get moisture, we were going to abuse the pastures. So taking the time to sit down and look, because I was doing the numbers on, if I sell all my cows right now, I'm out of debt other than land debt. If I sell part of them, I don't cash flow. So things were getting very black and white here this spring. And then luckily we were blessed with rain, and some of those decisions are behind us for now. But I think being vigilant, staying ahead of some of those things really does make a difference. And the other thing for us too, is we don't get greedy in a good year and take every bite of grass there is out there. I know a lot of times I'll put pictures up on Facebook or something, and I'll have somebody tell me that we have too much oxidized grass standing there. Yes, we do. But that kept us in the cow business a year longer last year, because all we had was oxidized grass. We were able to start supplementing protein the 1st of July and get through there. And I would say protein is another thing that helped us too. That just increased our efficiency. We're able to get animals to plants they would not have normally grazed otherwise, and use some of that without getting the stubble too short that was left in the pasture either. And then, and we don't have set destock dates like we should in our ranch plan, like a lot of guys do. There's not actual set plans written down or anything, but when you've grown up somewhere your whole life, your dad's been there his whole life, the dates in your head anyways. They're not something written down, not something on paper, but we know where they are, and not waiting too long to take care of those dates. And that goes back to what I said before. The guys that waited too long to destock, there's been some crown roots exposed on some grass here. And there could be pastures that honestly could be kind of messed up forever the way they look, or it's going to be a tough, long recovery period to get them going right again. So,
yeah. Knowing the dates and sticking to them is better than writing down the dates and not sticking to them.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I would say that's a big part of it. Talk to me a little bit about the role that Livewire fence supply plays in all of this. Has that been something that has helped in some way to get you guys by, as far as just kind of a side hustle that has kind of helped make ends meet, or does it play that kind of role for you guys?
Somewhat, yes. So the way Livewire started was when I came home in 2013, we were trying to get into this grazing deal, trying to push the soil health envelope. And I went to the local farm store and bought some of the pigtail posts and polywire they had there. And, by the time we had enough, yellow and black wire and some cheap white top posts around the place, we about quit grazing, because stuff was just junk pretty much. So in that same year, I'd bought a bunch of solar fence chargers, paid $600-700 a piece for them. None of them worked by the next year, and there was no warranty left, and it was going to cost a lot of money to replace them. So we had a rainy day in the shop one day, and I started building, and we kind of came up with a fence charger idea, and that's then some neighbors saw it, and it kind of took off. So then it just, by the grace of God, it grew. And at that point, it played a pretty vital role in us being able to get in quality supplies and go that route. It's, and there's not enough margin in fence supplies to make a ton of money. If you move enough volume, you can make some money. But one thing that we were blessed with, after COVID hit, my wife was working in town. they had lost a bunch of help, and they were wanting her to, keep working more and more hours to keep the office going. But she wasn't really getting rewarded for those hours. And I was getting pulled off the ranch to go pick our daughter up from daycare. And I just told her, I said, enough's enough. I said, I'm having trouble keeping up at home. If I have to go drive to town to pick my daughter up from daycare because they're making you work extra hours, this isn't worth it. So we were able to bring her home because of Livewire. And so now she's been able to be home, and she helps me when she can, but it's just been a blessing that she can raise our girls too from home. Mm-hmm. So at this point, and honestly, last year we were pulling money from the farm to put into Livewire just to keep things going because, our sales have been going up every year, which is amazing. But we saw how things doubled in cost over the last few years too. And the same thing happened there. I mean, we had less inventory on hand than we ever have for the last few years, but, our line of credit was bigger than it had ever been also. So it's no different than any farm or ranch operation, just working through those struggles and trying to keep everything moving forward is kind of where it's been. But yeah, it's been an awesome journey that happened by accident. So
yeah, what are some of the things that you guys kind of specialize in and stuff that you carry and where do you guys send out to and all those things?
So the stuff that we specialize in is I don't specialize in any brand of equipment. We carry Gallagher stuff. We've got Speedrite, or which used to be Stay Fix. We've got Cyclops fence chargers. Kind of what we've done is the more equipment that I've bought and tried out, which that one thing the business has done is allow me to try a lot of new things that I wouldn't have tried otherwise, because now I'm curious on what's better from brand to brand, in my opinion. So we use several different, I like PowerFlex polywire on a Gallagher reel with a Zammer handle on it. And the Zammer handles are from Speedrite. So we've put 3 brands into just one product on that. So that's kind of been our specialty, is outfitting farmers and ranchers with the stuff that we have used personally and tried out and know what we like. And everybody's got a different opinion on that, which is awesome. Some things work well for you that might not work for me, and vice versa. But by doing that, we've been able to put a pretty good guideline together on what products have stood the test of time or what is easily repairable too. That's the other side of it, is nothing is going to last forever in today's world. So being able to make repairs and do that at an honest price is something else. And then as far as where all we go now, we need to update our map, but I think we only have 5 states left that we haven't shipped to in the U.S. now. And then we've been into Canada as well. So that's been awesome to watch that grow. So
yeah, very happy Livewire fence supply customer here, and always appreciate the service and being able to get things here in a timely manner. And my only complaint is, when is PowerFlex going to bring back the 6-wire fence?
Yeah, I have asked several times, and I'm not sure if it's coming back.
Somebody, if it's not coming back, somebody else needs to make it, because you could put a half a mile of that on a quarter-mile reel. Oh, it is great. This is my favorite.
Yep.
I only got 2 of those reels from you when I got them, and I wish I would have ordered a dozen of them, because now I'm back to, I just squeeze as much as I can of the Gallagher wire on there, the turbo wire on there, because I have longer runs than PowerFlex 9-wire will fit on a quarter-mile reel. They don't quite reach on some of my longer runs, and I want to make sure I can use them that way. So that's what I have to do.
Yeah, and the unless like we came up with our Polypro grazer because I was tired of hand cranking reels, because those half-mile ones with the 9-strand on, they do get awfully heavy, and I don't care how big of a man you think you are. If you can crank those up all day, I would love to see it. And so, just trying to be innovative and come up with a few things like that to make some stuff easier with those types of things. But yeah, there's some products like that all of a sudden they're gone, and then you have to try and reconfigure what you're doing.
Yeah, the first thing, I think one of the first pieces of fencing advice I ever got was, don't use the mega reel from Gallagher. And what was the first thing I did? I bought a mega reel from Gallagher, and that one is it's the last one that I really go to if I can help it.
Right. Yep.
So, yeah, very good. Well, where could people go to find Livewire Fence Supply? Of course, it'll be in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/307.
Yep.
But what's the website?
The website is www.livewirefencesupply.com. And then on Facebook, we are Livewire LLC. And I'll be honest, we don't have all our products up on the website yet. We try and put some on Facebook, but if there's something somebody's after, just give us a call.
Anything else on this idea of surviving drought that we've missed or that you think is important?
Honestly, I think the most important part is don't go through it alone. Have somebody else that understands, the way that you run your operation, if they run one similar, or somebody to talk to, because honestly, the mental effects for me, I let it get to me. And like the day that those fall calves left last year, I came home and I told my wife, I said, I'm not going to hurt myself. Nothing's going on. I said, I just need some time. And, I just took off walking that night. Just had to clear my head. I knew it was what we needed to do. But it was hard to see those cows roll down the driveway too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think just a lot of that, just the mental health side of it, because financially it's a strain too, which brings us into some safety nets, which I guess is something that I should have mentioned before. So for some of our safety nets to get through this, I do have the rainfall insurance. I don't get greedy with it. I set mine up over the full year on all the native range acres, and that has taken care of us well. Because I think it might have, I need to look back at our numbers, but I think it was around 70,000 came into the ranch last year. Because of that, which was huge. The other thing that we're starting to do now, and we did it, this will be the first year for it. When I mentioned crop insurance earlier, I do not want to be part of mainstream agriculture, but to survive financially on a farm or ranch, it is set up for mainstream agriculture. So we've planted some of it. We've got more to plant yet. But we planted some corn on a pivot. We've got some milo on a pivot, and then we'll still be planting some grazing crops. But then on our dry land, we're planting milo also. We've talked to our insurance agent, no different than somebody chopping silage or something, but we're going to leave it stand in the field, have them come appraise it, and we're going to graze it that way, or we can harvest it whatever the market is conducive for, whether we need to graze it with animals. If that means bringing in outside animals that we can graze it with and then sell those animals, that next fall or something. Figure out a way to upgrade animals and really do what's right for the land. Because the one thing that I've seen in every drought is the people that take care of the land are resilient and spring back. The people that take care of the animals and just look after the animals and destroy their land, they have a hard time coming back. So that's another thing that we're looking at is how do we get into a system where we own animals for a shorter amount of time that we can upgrade to make some money on or be able to sell them easily at some point. So that's kind of a side note there on surviving it, but that's part of what we keep adapting after each drought is there seems to be a pattern here where we own less animals after each drought, but we may actually run more in the year. But it's a class of animal that is easy to destock without any financial pain. So
right. Yep. Will you be restocking this year at all then, or do you think that you'll graze more days than you have in the past, or what do you think?
So as far as this year goes, we won't be restocking it all this year, unless maybe, here in the fall with this rain, if the milo and stuff grows well, we may bring in some balling calves that we can wean and then graze through the winter. But as far as for this growing season, no. We've got quite a little recovery to do. Then, there are some bare spots and some pastures that we need to heal up. We've got some sacrifice areas on the edges of some fields that just didn't grow anything for 2 years. We need to heal up. Thankfully, those are covered in weeds now, and I've never been so happy to see weeds growing as I am this year. So just some of those things like that. We're not in a hurry to destock. And, maybe this 10 inches of rain is the only rain we're going to get this year too. I don't know.
Right.
We'll see how things progress. But we'll know when the pastures are producing again and when it's time to restock. Just going out and spending time checking out the diversity and the reproductive stage the plants are in, because I try to, when we graze, if you look at one paddock from year to year, I try and harvest the cool season grass in it one year and not let it head out, but let a warm season grass head out. And the next year I'll try and let that cool season grass head out and graze the warm season grass. Well, the last 2 years, nothing has headed out here. So we didn't get them short. But we need some serious recovery time too. So that's kind of where we're at on that phase.
Sure. Do you think that animals, you talked about breed conception rates on some of the stuff that's home raised versus stuff that wasn't. Do you think that animals that are adapted to their environment played a role in kind of the success of your guys' journey through this drought too?
Yeah, they did. Let's see, that was 2012. I was one of the student managers at the beef farm there in Fort Hays at Kansas. And so we calved out those heifers that year. And so I bought 40 head of those heifers. Well, we weren't giving them a lot of supplement down there, but they were way too big of animals for our time here because, I didn't think about it at the time, but there's 2 months more growing season in the year down there, or close to it, than there is here. So even though they don't supplement, 2 months out of the year when you're not either having to eat stockpiled forage or hay, that's a pretty big difference. And honestly, most of those cows fell out early on, but the cows that were left towards the end of the drought weren't breeding back either. So we finally just culled every one of them and sent them down the road. And other than those cows and a couple bulls, since I've been home from college, I think we bought 2 bulls, and those were both early on. We've not brought anything else in from outside. It's all been a closed herd. Since then, retaining our own bulls and all of our own replacement heifers, and that has been good. Our calves are getting more consistent than they've ever been, and that's part of the reason we're getting these sheep genetics we are too. I spent some time talking to Ash Phillips about the difference between inbreeding and line breeding. And then Dad had heard a guy speak from South Africa about cattle and their difference in line breeding and inbreeding. And they both said the same thing. Never full brother to full sister, never father to mother or son to mother, vice versa. Never that first line, but half sister to half brother all day long will make your best genetics. And that is looking like it's very true. Maybe it'll come crashing down on us someday here. I don't know. But if it does, I guess we can go buy some bulls and we've got it fixed. So that's kind of where we're at as far as genetics go and what we do.
Very good. Jacob, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Very good stuff there with Jacob. He's a very humble guy. I really appreciate his perspective and kind of some of the things that they've been thinking about and working on as they have been through this drought, and just really appreciate the featuring how managing well through the drought has enabled them to really get off on the right foot as the drought shows signs of breaking. So very encouraging stuff there. Really appreciate that. Coming up, Lord willing, next on the Working Cows podcast, we'll be talking to Fernando Folomir. Now, that name should sound familiar to you because he was my guest on episode 8. And so exactly 300 episodes later, he's coming back, and we're going to talk to him about some of the things that he is doing to manage in a brittle environment there. And he's got a new role, or a role since I talked to him 300 episodes ago, that he started since I talked to him 300 episodes ago with Understanding Ag. And he works for them as an educator and a facilitator. So we're going to talk to him about that and applying the 6, the 3, and the 4, the 6 principles of soil health, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship, and the 4 ecosystem processes to his brittle environment in the Chihuahuan Desert in Mexico. So look forward to that coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.